All first class is my territory, you people need to learn your damn place. Those venomous words exploded through the cabin of Flight 447, captured on dozens of phone cameras, instantly turning a privileged white woman into the most hated person on the internet. In that moment, Karen Mitchell's face twisted with pure racial hatred, her finger jabbing through the air like a weapon, her voice dripping with corporate entitlement and airline discrimination that would destroy everything she thought she controlled. But standing there with unshakable dignity, shoulders squared and head held high despite the public humiliation, was David Miles, a man whose calm smile held secrets that would soon make Karen's racist meltdown the most expensive 60 seconds of her life. Those were the words that shattered a woman's world and revealed a truth so shocking that it would transform airline discrimination policies forever. But let me rewind and show you exactly how one act of kindness escalated into the most viral airport justice moment of 2025. Welcome back to Black and Bruised Stories. If you're new here, you've just joined a community dedicated to truth, justice, and survival. Show some love by clicking the like and subscribe button. Before we dive deeper into this story, drop a comment, where you are watching from and what time it is for you right now. Here's how it all started. Tuesday morning, JFK International Airport, 7:47 a.m. A well-dressed black businessman approaches seat 1A in first class, his leather briefcase swinging gently at his side, an expensive watch catching the cabin light. David Miles moves with the quiet confidence of a man who's earned every success through years of overcoming obstacles others never face. But as he reaches his rightfully assigned seat, he finds it already occupied. Karen Mitchell sits there like she owns the entire plane, her manicured fingers gripping her designer phone, perfectly styled blonde hair framing a face that's mastered the art of looking perpetually inconvenienced. Her designer luggage fills the overhead compartment, and her entire posture screams territorial entitlement. "Excuse me," David says with genuine politeness, his boarding pass clearly showing seat 1A. "I believe this is my assigned seat." Karen looks up with the expression of someone who's never been questioned about anything in her privileged life. Her eyes narrow as she takes in his appearance, successful, well-dressed, clearly belonging in first class. But her racist assumptions immediately kick into overdrive. "Well, I'm sitting here now," she snaps, her voice rising just enough to catch other passengers' attention. "And I'm not moving anywhere." She waves her boarding pass aggressively, and here's the kicker that makes this story absolutely incredible. It clearly shows seat 3C in economy class. She's not even close to being in the right section, let alone the right seat. But her entitlement has convinced her that making noise and causing drama will get her whatever she wants. David glances at her boarding pass, sees the obvious mistake, and makes a decision that reveals everything about his character. Instead of embarrassing her publicly, instead of calling security, instead of using his authority she has no idea he possesses, to have her forcibly removed, he chooses the path of grace. "That's okay," he says with a genuine smile that would make his mother proud. "I'll take seat 1B. It's really not a big deal." He moves with the fluid dignity of someone who's never needed to prove his worth through confrontation. For David, this isn't about losing face or backing down. It's about choosing kindness over conflict, about being the bigger person even when he has every right to enforce his claim. You see, for a man who literally owns every seat on this airplane, giving up one seat is truly no big deal at all. David settles into 1B, pulls out his Wall Street Journal, and begins reading with the calm focus of someone accustomed to making million-dollar decisions before breakfast. His phone buzzes quietly with messages from board members and corporate executives, but he handles each call with hushed professionalism that carries the weight of real authority. The London merger discussions can wait, he tells one caller, his voice carrying quiet power that comes from controlling billion-dollar corporate decisions. "Family comes first today. My mother's 80th birthday celebration is more important than any business timeline we've established." But Karen's racism won't let her accept his grace. Instead of being grateful for his accommodation, instead of recognizing his obvious success and legitimacy, her prejudiced mind starts working overtime to justify why this accomplished black man doesn't belong in first class at all. She studies his expensive Swiss watch, his perfectly tailored Italian suit, his confident phone conversations about international business expansion, and her racist assumptions refuse to accept the obvious truth, that he's exactly where he belongs, that he's more successful than she could ever imagine, that his generosity came from strength, not weakness. Something's not right about this whole situation, she mutters to the passenger beside her, loud enough for David to hear every poisonous word. People like that don't just give up first-class seats unless they're hiding something. He's probably using stolen miles or some kind of charity upgrade program for disadvantaged communities. Her voice carries that particular venom of passenger discrimination, the toxic assumption that successful black professionals must have cheated or manipulated their way into spaces she considers exclusively hers. The irony is devastating. She's attacking the very person who showed her undeserved kindness, questioning the legitimacy of the man who owns the entire airline she's flying on. What Karen doesn't know is that David Miles isn't just another successful businessman tolerating her racism for the sake of peace. He's the CEO and majority owner of this very airline, a position he inherited from his late father and transformed through 15 years of innovative leadership and unwavering commitment to passenger dignity and corporate social responsibility. His decision to give up his seat wasn't weakness. It was the instinctive generosity of someone who literally controls every aspect of her travel experience and doesn't need to fight for space in his own company. His calm responses to her provocations come from knowing that he employs every person currently serving her, that he could ground this flight with a single phone call, that her racist assumptions are being directed at the one person who has absolute power over her entire journey. If you want to see how an act of kindness gets twisted into the most explosive airline discrimination incident ever recorded, smash that subscribe button because this story is about to expose the dangerous cost of passenger prejudice and racist assumptions in the most spectacular way possible. David's phone continues buzzing with urgent corporate messages, merger discussions worth hundreds of millions, strategic decisions that affect thousands of employees worldwide, international expansion plans that could reshape the entire aviation industry. But he ignores them all because today is about surprising his mother in London for her 80th birthday, about remembering the values she instilled in him, about treating every person with dignity regardless of their ability to benefit him. The tragic irony deepens as we learn more about Karen's desperate circumstances. Her recent divorce from a wealthy businessman has left her frantically clinging to status symbols and social hierarchies as proof of her worth in a world that's rapidly changing around her. Her upcoming trip to London for her daughter's wedding has amplified every insecurity, every fear that she's losing her place in the social pecking order she's spent her life climbing. She has no idea that her next move will transform her from an entitled passenger into the most hated woman on social media, that her racist assumptions about the quiet man beside her will cost her everything she thinks she controls, that the person she's about to attack with increasing viciousness is the one human being on Earth with the power to end her travel privileges permanently. What happened next would transform Karen's ungrateful entitlement into a masterclass in how passenger discrimination and airline prejudice can backfire with devastating consequences. Remember, David Miles had just given up his rightfully assigned seat to accommodate this woman who was clearly sitting in the wrong place with the wrong ticket. Any decent person would have thanked him, maybe even felt embarrassed about their mistake. But Karen Mitchell's racist worldview was about to turn his act of grace into fuel for her discriminatory fire. As David quietly reads his newspaper, Karen's eyes follow his every movement like a predator studying prey. She watches him handle important business calls with the easy confidence of someone accustomed to boardroom negotiations and high-stakes corporate decisions. But instead of recognizing his obvious legitimacy and success, her prejudiced mind spins increasingly toxic justifications for why his generosity somehow proves he doesn't belong in first class. Real first-class passengers don't just give up their seats like that, she announces to the elderly couple across the aisle, her voice deliberately loud enough to ensure David hears every word. There's definitely something suspicious going on here. Normal people fight for what they paid for. They don't just hand over premium seats to avoid confrontation. Her twisted logic reveals the depth of her racism. In Karen's prejudiced worldview, David's kindness becomes evidence of guilt, his generosity proof of illegitimacy, his grace confirmation that he's somehow gaming the system. She literally cannot accept that a successful black man would choose accommodation over confrontation because, in her racist mind, he must have been afraid of being caught in some kind of fraudulent scheme. The elderly couple shifts uncomfortably, clearly recognizing the racist undertones but uncertain how to respond to such blatant prejudice being expressed so openly. Meanwhile, Marcus Thompson, a young black businessman sitting 2 rows behind, leans forward with growing concern as he recognizes this textbook example of the subtle discrimination that successful black professionals face daily in corporate America. David glances up from his newspaper, his expressions cycling through confusion, hurt, and dawning recognition of the racist assumptions being made about his character. His jaw tightens almost imperceptibly, the only outward sign of controlled anger building beneath his diplomatic exterior. Karen signals flight attendant Sarah Flowers with the imperious gesture of someone who's never been told no, her manicured finger cutting through the air like a weapon of privilege and entitlement. "I need to speak with you about a serious passenger security concern," Karen announces, her voice pitched to carry throughout first class and ensure maximum attention for her performance of righteous indignation. Sarah approaches with the professional smile that comes from 5 years of dealing with entitled passengers and airline discrimination, but her trained eyes immediately assess the situation with growing alarm. She can see David's expensive attire, his Wall Street Journal, his obvious legitimacy as a first-class passenger, but she also recognizes the dangerous tone in Karen's voice that suggests this interaction is about to escalate far beyond normal customer service protocols. "How can I assist you today, ma'am?" Sarah asks with practiced diplomacy, her posture remaining neutral while her mind races through company procedures for handling discrimination complaints and passenger conflicts. Karen leans forward conspiratorially, her voice dropping to a stage whisper that ensures every passenger within hearing range can absorb every word of her racist accusations. "I'm extremely concerned about this passenger's behavior," she says, gesturing toward David with the dismissive wave of someone identifying a problem that requires immediate resolution. "When I boarded, he claimed this was his seat, but when I showed him my boarding pass and stood my ground, he immediately backed down and moved without any fight or explanation. That's not normal behavior for someone who legitimately belongs in first class." The breathtaking audacity of her racist logic leaves even Sarah momentarily speechless. Karen is literally complaining about David's kindness, using his generosity as evidence of criminal activity, transforming his accommodation into proof of fraudulent behavior. In her prejudiced worldview, a black man choosing peace over conflict must be hiding something criminal, must be afraid of official scrutiny, must be engaged in some kind of systematic deception. David's head turns slowly toward their conversation, his expression shifting from confusion to disbelief as he processes the racist assumptions being made about his character and motivations. The Wall Street Journal crinkles slightly in his tightening grip, the only physical sign of the controlled fury building beneath his maintained composure. Sarah's professional training battles with common sense as she recognizes the obviously discriminatory nature of Karen's complaints. She can see the legitimate confusion in David's eyes, the quality of his clothing and accessories that suggest serious corporate success, the business calls and financial newspapers that indicate significant professional legitimacy. But airline policy requires her to take all passenger security concerns seriously, even when they're clearly motivated by prejudice and racist assumptions. "Ma'am, I understand your concerns," Sarah says carefully, walking the diplomatic tightrope between customer service and basic human decency. "However, passenger seating arrangements can be quite flexible, and it's not unusual for travelers to accommodate each other during minor conflicts. Mr.?" She glances at David's boarding pass. Mr. Miles appears to be a legitimate first-class passenger with proper documentation. But Karen's entitlement won't be satisfied with reasonable explanations or diplomatic deflection. Her desperate need for validation requires someone in authority to confirm her prejudiced assumptions and take action against the man whose only crime was showing her completely undeserved kindness. "This isn't about normal accommodation," Karen snaps, her voice rising with self-righteous indignation. "This is about passenger safety and airline security. I want this man's documentation thoroughly examined, his boarding pass verified through proper channels, and his right to be in first class confirmed beyond any doubt. Something about this entire situation feels wrong, and I refuse to spend 8 hours wondering what kind of scam or security threat I'm being exposed to. The poisonous implications hang in the cabin air like toxic gas, making other passengers shift uncomfortably as they witness this display of passenger prejudice and systematic racism playing out in real time. Marcus pulls out his phone, not to film like others might, but to document what he recognizes as a perfect example of the travel discrimination that destroys reputations and perpetuates institutional bias in corporate America. Meanwhile, in the cockpit, Captain Roberts receives an increasingly urgent message that makes his 30 years of flying experience seem suddenly inadequate. The communication is cryptic but alarming, something about VIP passenger complications and immediate corporate protocol activation that sends warning bells clanging through his professional instincts. Back in the cabin, David slowly folds his newspaper with deliberate precision, each crease sharp enough to cut through the thick tension filling the space around them. His movements are controlled, dignified, carrying the quiet authority of someone who spent years building character through adversity and learning that true strength comes from maintaining composure under pressure. "Ma'am," he says in a voice that carries the weight of boardroom negotiations and corporate leadership, "I'm genuinely confused about what you think I've done wrong. I accommodated your seating preference to avoid conflict, and I'm sitting quietly reading my newspaper and handling legitimate business calls. What exactly is your specific concern about my presence here?" His question is perfectly reasonable, delivered with the diplomatic tone of someone accustomed to defusing corporate tensions and finding rational solutions to complex interpersonal problems. But to Karen's racist mindset, his calm reasonableness only confirms her suspicions that he's engaged in calculated deception rather than displaying genuine character and professional competence. "Don't you dare turn this situation around on me," she fires back, her voice sharpening with defensive aggression. "I'm not the one who needs to explain anything here. I paid full price for first-class service, I belong in this cabin, and I have every right to feel safe and comfortable without having to worry about suspicious passenger behavior or potential security threats." The irony reaches staggering levels of cruelty. Karen is attacking the very person who made her comfortable seat possible, questioning the legitimacy of the man who gave up his rightful place to accommodate her entitled demands, using his grace as evidence of guilt and his kindness as proof of criminality. She's literally biting the hand that fed her, spitting in the face of generosity, and weaponizing airline security protocols to validate her racist worldview. Hit that subscribe button right now if you want to see airline discrimination backfire in the most spectacular way imaginable, because what Karen does next will prove that assumptions about race and success can destroy everything you think you control. Sarah finds herself trapped between competing institutional pressures, airline policies that require taking passenger concerns seriously, professional training that helps her recognize obvious discrimination, and growing awareness that this situation is spiraling beyond normal customer service protocols into territory that could expose the company to serious legal and public relations consequences. She glances again at David's boarding pass, confirming that it clearly shows seat 1A, the very seat Karen is currently occupying, which proves that his accommodation was genuine generosity rather than fraudulent behavior. The documentation is perfectly legitimate, his demeanor completely professional, his responses measured and diplomatic. Every objective indicator suggests he's exactly what he appears to be, a successful businessman showing remarkable grace under pressure. But Karen's discrimination enters a new phase of toxic escalation as she realizes her initial complaints aren't generating the immediate validation and action she expected. Her entitled desperation demands results, requires someone in authority to confirm her racist assumptions and remove what she perceives as a threat to her social hierarchy. Other passengers begin openly taking sides based on surface appearances and unconscious biases. Some nod approvingly at Karen's demands for increased security screening, their own prejudices activated by her skillful manipulation of fear and discrimination. Others shift uncomfortably in their seats, recognizing the racist undertones but uncertain how to intervene in a situation that's rapidly escalating beyond normal passenger conflicts. The corporate machinery behind the scenes begins responding to the growing crisis. Ground crew members whisper urgently about unusual passenger complications. Airport supervisors receive alerts about potential security incidents. The airline's crisis management protocols activate as multiple systems detect the escalating discrimination complaint and passenger conflict. David's phone buzzes again with what appears to be an increasingly urgent call from corporate headquarters, but he declines it with the patient gesture of someone who refuses to let external pressures compromise his principles or dignity. What Karen doesn't realize is that her racist attack is being directed at the one person who could resolve all her concerns with a single phone call, who employs every person currently serving her, who owns the very seat she's defending and every other seat on the aircraft. What would you do if someone attacked your character and questioned your right to be somewhere after you showed them kindness? Share your thoughts in the comments because David's next decision will determine whether this becomes a quiet lesson in dignity or an explosive demonstration of how power really works in corporate America. The stage is set for an escalation that will expose Karen's racism to the entire world and transform David's act of grace into the most viral example of travel justice the internet has ever witnessed. Her prejudice is about to cost her everything she thinks she deserves, and the quiet man whose kindness started this nightmare is about to remind everyone that assumptions can be dangerous, dignity has power, and sometimes the people you underestimate control your entire destiny. What happens next will demonstrate exactly how passenger discrimination and airline prejudice can escalate from private bias into public humiliation with devastating consequences for everyone involved. Karen's racist assumptions about David's legitimacy were about to transform from whispered complaints into a full-scale public attack that would expose her true character to the entire world. Having failed to get immediate satisfaction from the flight attendant, Karen decides to take her discrimination campaign directly to the court of public opinion. She stands up in her seat, David's rightful seat, and addresses the entire first-class cabin with the commanding presence of someone who spent her life demanding attention and getting her way through sheer aggressive entitlement. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announces, her voice carrying the authoritative tone of someone calling a meeting to order, "I think we all have a right to know what kind of passenger security situation we're dealing with here." Every head in first class turns toward her performance, some with curiosity, others with growing discomfort as they recognize the racist undertones of what's about to unfold. Marcus Thompson shifts forward in his seat, his business training helping him recognize the systematic nature of the discrimination he's witnessing, while other passengers pull out phones to document what they sense will be a significant incident. Karen gestures dramatically toward David, who's still sitting quietly with his newspaper, his expression cycling between bewilderment and controlled anger as he processes the public nature of her attack on his character and legitimacy. "This passenger," she continues, her voice dripping with accusatory authority, "claimed this seat was his when I boarded, but when I stood my ground and showed him my boarding pass, he immediately backed down and moved without any explanation. Now, I ask you, does that sound like the behavior of someone who legitimately belongs in first class?" The twisted logic of her racism reaches new levels of audacious cruelty. She's literally using David's kindness as evidence against him, weaponizing his generosity to validate her prejudiced assumptions, turning his grace into proof of guilt in the most public way possible. Her performance is designed to recruit other passengers into her discriminatory worldview, to build a coalition of bias that will pressure airline staff into taking action against the man whose only crime was showing her undeserved accommodation. David slowly places his newspaper on his lap, his movements deliberate and controlled as he processes the reality that his private act of kindness has been transformed into a public spectacle of racism and discrimination. His eyes meet Karen's with the steady gaze of someone who's faced this kind of prejudice before, who's built character through adversity, who understands that dignity sometimes requires standing up to bullies even when you'd prefer to maintain peace. "Ma'am," he says in a voice that carries newfound steel beneath its diplomatic surface, "I gave up that seat to avoid exactly this kind of confrontation. I'm not sure why my attempt to be accommodating has become grounds for questioning my legitimacy as a passenger." His response is measured, professional, carrying the authority of someone accustomed to corporate negotiations and high-stakes business discussions. But to Karen's racist mindset, his calm competence only confirms her suspicions that he's engaged in some kind of sophisticated deception designed to fool airline staff and legitimate passengers. "See," she exclaims triumphantly, addressing her audience of increasingly uncomfortable passengers. "That's exactly what I'm talking about. Normal people don't just give up premium seats they paid for, they fight for what they deserve." His behavior proves he knows he doesn't belong here, that he's probably using fraudulent documentation or stolen frequent flyer miles or some other scheme to access services he hasn't legitimately earned. The racist assumptions pour out of her like poison, each word revealing deeper levels of prejudice and entitlement that have been festering beneath her polished exterior. She's not just attacking David personally, she's attacking the fundamental right of successful Black professionals to exist in spaces of corporate privilege without having their legitimacy questioned at every turn. Other passengers react with a mixture of shock, discomfort, and in some cases, unconscious agreement with her discriminatory logic. The elderly couple who initially seemed sympathetic to her complaints now looks deeply uncomfortable with the racist direction of her public performance. A business traveler 2 rows back shakes his head in disgust at the blatant prejudice being displayed so openly. But Karen's discrimination campaign is just getting started. Having tasted the intoxicating power of public attention and perceived validation, she decides to escalate her attack to even more dangerous levels of racist accusation and travel bias. "I demand that airline security thoroughly investigate this passenger's documentation," she declares with the imperial authority of someone who's never been denied anything she's demanded. "I want his boarding pass verified through official channels, his identification checked against security databases, and his right to be in first class confirmed beyond any reasonable doubt. I pay good money for premium service, and I deserve to feel safe from potential security threats and passenger fraud." The implications of her words hang in the cabin air like a toxic cloud of systematic racism and passenger discrimination. She's essentially demanding that David be treated as a suspected terrorist or criminal, that his presence in first class be subjected to extraordinary scrutiny, that his legitimate business travel be transformed into a security investigation based solely on her racist discomfort with his success and generosity. David's jaw tightens as the full impact of her public attack hits him. This isn't just personal prejudice anymore. This is systematic discrimination being weaponized through airline security protocols, travel bias being used to humiliate and dehumanize him in front of dozens of witnesses. His phone buzzes again with urgent calls from board members and corporate executives, but he lets them go to voicemail as he focuses on maintaining his dignity in the face of escalating racism. Sarah Flowers approaches the situation with growing alarm, recognizing that Karen's public discrimination campaign has transformed a simple passenger complaint into a potential corporate crisis with serious legal and public relations implications. Her training tells her to de-escalate the situation, but airline policy requires her to take security concerns seriously, even when they're clearly motivated by racial prejudice. "Ma'am, I understand your concerns," Sarah says carefully, trying to navigate between customer service obligations and basic human decency. "However, I can assure you that all passengers in first class have been properly screened and documented according to airline security protocols. Mr. Miles has presented legitimate identification and boarding passes that have been verified through our standard procedures." But Karen's entitlement won't be satisfied with professional reassurances or diplomatic explanations. Her desperate need for validation and control requires someone in authority to acknowledge her racist concerns and take visible action against the man she's decided represents a threat to her perceived superiority. "That's not good enough," she snaps, her voice rising to ensure maximum audience for her discriminatory demands. "I want enhanced security screening, I want supervisory review of his documentation, and I want confirmation from airline management that proper protocols have been followed. I don't care how legitimate his paperwork looks, something about this situation feels wrong, and I refuse to be ignored or dismissed when I'm raising legitimate security concerns." The corporate machinery responds to her escalating complaints with increasing urgency. Airport security receives alerts about potential passenger conflicts. Airline supervisors are notified about discrimination complaints requiring management intervention. The crisis escalates through multiple levels of corporate hierarchy as Karen's racism triggers systematic responses designed to handle legitimate security threats. Meanwhile, Captain Roberts receives increasingly cryptic messages about VIP passenger complications that make his decades of flying experience seem inadequate for whatever storm is brewing in his first-class cabin. Ground crew members whisper about unusual corporate protocols being activated, about important calls from headquarters, about passenger situations that extend far beyond normal customer service issues. David makes a decision that reveals everything about his character and leadership philosophy. Instead of revealing his true identity to shut down Karen's discrimination, instead of using his corporate power to end her racist attack immediately, he chooses to let the situation play out naturally. He understands that exposing systematic racism requires allowing it to reveal itself fully, that teaching lessons about prejudice and dignity requires patience and strategic thinking. "Ma'am," he says in a voice that carries quiet authority and controlled steel, "I want you to understand something very clearly. Some mistakes can't be undone once they're made public. Some words can't be taken back once they're spoken. Some assumptions can have consequences that extend far beyond what you might expect." His warning is delivered with the calm precision of someone who spent years learning how to wield power responsibly, how to give people opportunities to reconsider their actions before facing inevitable consequences. But to Karen's racist mindset, his measured response sounds like a threat rather than wisdom, like intimidation rather than guidance. "Are you threatening me?" she exclaims, her voice pitched to ensure every passenger hears her performance of victimhood. "Did everyone hear that? This suspicious passenger just threatened me for raising legitimate security concerns. This proves exactly what I've been saying about his inappropriate behavior and potential danger to other passengers." The irony is breathtaking in its cruelty and stupidity. Karen is twisting David's attempt to help her avoid humiliation into evidence of threatening behavior, using his wisdom as proof of danger, transforming his grace into validation of her racist assumptions. She's essentially hanging herself with the very rope he's trying to use to pull her back from the cliff of public humiliation and career destruction. Subscribe right now if you want to see how passenger prejudice and airline discrimination can backfire with consequences that destroy everything someone thinks they control, because Karen's racist attack is about to encounter a truth that will shock the entire world. Other passengers begin openly filming the confrontation as it escalates beyond normal customer service issues into a viral moment of systematic racism and travel discrimination being exposed in real time. Marcus Thompson documents the incident with the professional precision of someone who understands the importance of preserving evidence of airline bias and institutional prejudice. Airport security finally arrives in response to Karen's escalating complaints, their presence adding official weight to her discrimination campaign while simultaneously creating the documentation trail that will eventually expose the racist nature of her accusations. The uniformed officers approach with professional caution, clearly uncertain about the nature of the passenger conflict they're being asked to resolve. David remains seated with quiet dignity as security personnel review his documentation, his boarding pass, his identification, and his legitimate right to be in first class. Every piece of paperwork confirms what should have been obvious from the beginning, that he's exactly what he appears to be, a successful businessman traveling on legitimate tickets with proper authorization. But Karen's racism has reached the point where facts and evidence become irrelevant to her discriminatory worldview. She's so invested in her racist assumptions that she literally cannot accept objective reality when it contradicts her prejudiced beliefs about who belongs in spaces of corporate privilege and success. "I don't care what his paperwork says," she declares to the security officers with imperial authority. "I know what I witnessed, I know what feels wrong about the situation, and I demand enhanced screening and supervisory review of his right to be in first class. Something about his behavior proves he doesn't belong here, and I won't be satisfied until someone in real authority confirms my concerns." David's phone buzzes again with what appears to be an incredibly urgent call from someone at the highest levels of corporate hierarchy. This time, instead of declining the call, he glances at the screen and makes a decision that will change everything. He answers with quiet authority that carries the weight of someone who's tired of being patient with racism and discrimination. Tell the board I'll be delayed, he says in a voice that suddenly carries unmistakable corporate command. We have a passenger situation that requires my immediate attention, and I need management protocols activated for discrimination incident documentation and response. Karen's eyes narrow as she processes his words, her racist mind working overtime to explain away what her ears are telling her about the true nature of the man she's been attacking. But her prejudice has become so deeply entrenched that she literally cannot accept the possibility that she's made a catastrophic error in judgment. Have you ever seen someone's prejudice blind them to obvious truth even when evidence is staring them in the face? Comment below about times you've witnessed discrimination backfire, because what happens next will prove that assumptions about race and power can cost someone everything they think they deserve. The trap is set, the evidence is documented, and Karen's racist discrimination campaign is about to encounter the truth that will transform her from an entitled passenger into the most hated person on social media. Her prejudice has carried her past the point of no return, and David's patience with her discrimination has finally reached its natural limit. His phone buzzes one more time with what appears to be the most urgent call yet from corporate headquarters. This time, instead of declining, he glances at the screen and makes a decision that will change everything about this situation and everyone who's witnessed Karen's racist performance. He answers the call with quiet authority that suddenly carries unmistakable corporate command, his voice shifting into tones that suggest he's accustomed to making decisions that affect thousands of employees and millions of dollars in business operations. Yes, I'm aware of the situation, he says with controlled precision that makes every passenger lean forward to hear his words. Activate discrimination incident protocols immediately. I want full documentation of everything that's happened here, complete passenger manifest review, and legal department consultation about potential defamation and harassment claims. Karen's eyes widen as she processes his words, her racist mind working desperately to explain away what her ears are telling her about the true nature of the man she's been systematically attacking and humiliating for the past 30 minutes. But her prejudice has become so psychologically entrenched that she literally cannot accept the possibility that she's made a catastrophic error in judgment about power, authority, and corporate hierarchy. Who do you think you're fooling with that fake corporate language? She sneers with the desperate aggression of someone whose worldview is being challenged by reality. I wasn't born yesterday. I know exactly what you're doing, and I'm not falling for your intimidation tactics or your pretend authority. David looks directly into her eyes with the steady gaze of someone who's about to deliver the most devastating revelation in airline discrimination history. His expression carries the weight of years spent building character through adversity, developing wisdom through facing exactly this kind of prejudice, learning how to use power responsibly even when dealing with people who've shown him nothing but racist disrespect. Ma'am, he says with final authority that makes the entire cabin fall silent in anticipation, you've demanded to speak to airline management about your concerns. You've insisted on an enhanced security review of my legitimacy. You've publicly questioned my right to be in first class and demanded official verification of my corporate authority. He pauses deliberately, allowing the weight of his words to settle over the increasingly tense atmosphere in the cabin. Other passengers lean forward, sensing that something momentous is about to happen, that this confrontation is approaching a climax that will forever change how they think about assumptions, prejudice, and power in corporate America. You're about to get exactly what you've been demanding, David continues with quiet precision that makes every word land like thunder. But I want you to understand that once this revelation happens, once the truth about who I am becomes public knowledge, there will be no taking back your accusations, no undoing your discriminatory behavior, no escaping the consequences of your racist assumptions about my legitimacy and character. Karen's face flushes red with defiant rage as she processes what she interprets as continued threats and intimidation from someone she's convinced is engaged in elaborate deception. Her entitled desperation has reached such levels that she literally cannot conceive of backing down or acknowledging the possibility that her prejudiced assumptions might be catastrophically wrong. I don't care who you claim to be or what authority you think you have, she declares with the imperial command of someone making her final stand against forces she perceives as threatening her social superiority. I know what I've witnessed, I know what feels wrong about this situation, and I demand immediate resolution from the real authorities who run this airline." She gestures dramatically toward the approaching airline supervisor, a nervous-looking middle manager who's been summoned to handle what ground control has described as an escalating passenger discrimination incident with potential corporate implications. The supervisor approaches with the cautious expression of someone who's about to walk into a situation that could define his entire career. "I am Karen Mitchell," she announces with the authority of someone introducing herself to resolve a crisis through sheer force of personality and social connections. "I am a platinum-level frequent flyer, a preferred customer with significant corporate travel accounts, and I am demanding immediate action regarding this suspicious passenger situation that has been allowed to escalate far beyond acceptable customer service standards." Her voice carries the entitled expectation of someone who spent her life getting results through aggressive demands and social pressure. She's playing her final cards, using every tool of privilege and corporate influence she believes will give her victory over the man whose only crime was showing her kindness and accommodation. The airline supervisor glances between Karen and David, clearly recognizing the explosive nature of the situation he's been called to resolve. His training tells him to de-escalate passenger conflicts, but the discriminatory undertones of Karen's complaints create legal and public relations implications that extend far beyond normal customer service protocols. "Ma'am, I understand there's been some concern about passenger documentation and seating arrangements," he says with diplomatic caution. "I've been asked to review the situation and ensure that all proper procedures have been followed according to airline policy and federal security regulations." Karen's face lights up with triumphant satisfaction as she perceives official validation for her discriminatory complaints and racist assumptions about David's legitimacy. She's convinced that corporate authority will finally confirm her prejudiced worldview and take action against the man she's decided represents a threat to her perceived superiority. "Exactly," she exclaims with vindicated authority. "I've been trying to get proper attention for this security concern for over 30 minutes. This passenger's behavior has been suspicious from the beginning, his responses to legitimate questions have been evasive and threatening, and I demand enhanced verification of his right to be in first class." The supervisor pulls out his tablet to review passenger documentation and corporate protocols, but before he can begin his official investigation, David makes a decision that will instantly transform this entire situation from customer service complaint into the most viral example of airline discrimination backfiring in corporate history. He reaches into his briefcase with deliberate precision and removes a business card that carries the weight of absolute authority in the aviation industry. When he hands it to the stunned supervisor, the man's face immediately drains of all color as he recognizes the name, title, and corporate position that will forever change how everyone in this cabin thinks about assumptions, prejudice, and power. "I believe this should resolve any questions about my legitimacy or authority," David says with a quiet command that makes every passenger strain to hear his words. "I am David Miles, Chief Executive Officer and majority owner of this airline. This is my company, these are my employees, and this is my aircraft." The revelation hits the cabin like a nuclear explosion of shock, disbelief, and dawning horror as passengers realize they've just witnessed the most spectacular backfire of airline prejudice and passenger discrimination in aviation history. The silence in first class is deafening as the full weight of David's revelation settles over every passenger, crew member, and security official who has witnessed Karen's 30-minute campaign of racist discrimination against the owner of the entire airline. The business card in the supervisor's trembling hands represents more than just corporate identification. It's the smoking gun that will transform this incident from a customer service complaint into the most viral example of airline discrimination backfiring in business history. Karen's face cycles through confusion, disbelief, and growing terror as the full implications of David's identity crash over her like a devastating tsunami of consequences. The man she's been systematically attacking, publicly humiliating, and racially profiling for 30 minutes is the one person on Earth with absolute power over her travel experience, her airline privileges, and potentially her entire professional reputation. The supervisor's voice shakes as he addresses David with the desperate deference of someone who realizes his career might hang in the balance of how he handles this unprecedented corporate crisis. Mr. Miles, sir, we had no idea, he stammers, his professional composure completely shattered by the magnitude of the situation he's been called to resolve. The passenger complaint indicated a seating dispute and security concerns, but there was no mention of, we never would have. David raises his hand with the gentle authority of someone who spent years learning how to manage corporate crises and human resources disasters with wisdom and strategic thinking. His expression carries the weight of leadership that comes from building character through adversity, developing patience through facing systematic discrimination, and understanding that teaching moments require careful handling to achieve maximum impact. This situation provides a perfect example of why our anti-discrimination training programs need immediate enhancement and expansion, David says with measured authority that makes every word carry corporate policy implications. What you've witnessed here represents systematic bias, passenger discrimination, and racial profiling that cannot be tolerated at any level of our organization or customer experience. Karen's desperate mind races through possible explanations, excuses, and escape strategies as she realizes that every racist assumption she's voiced, every discriminatory demand she's made, every moment of her prejudiced performance has been directed at the one person with ultimate power over her airline privileges, her professional travel options, and potentially her entire future in corporate aviation. Mr. Miles, she begins with the trembling voice of someone whose entire world is collapsing beneath the weight of her own prejudice, I had no way of knowing who you were. You never identified yourself as airline management or ownership. How could I possibly have realized that my legitimate security concerns were being directed at someone with corporate authority? Her attempt to rationalize 30 minutes of racist behavior reveals the depth of her discriminatory mindset. She's essentially arguing that her prejudiced assumptions would have been acceptable if directed at anyone other than the company owner, that racial profiling becomes problematic only when it targets someone with power to retaliate. That systematic discrimination is justified as long as the victim lacks corporate authority to defend themselves. David's expression shifts to controlled disappointment as he processes her attempt to excuse passenger discrimination through ignorance of corporate hierarchy rather than acknowledging the fundamental wrongness of racial bias regardless of the victim's position or power. Ma'am, the issue isn't whether you knew my corporate position. He responds with the patient authority of someone who's spent years educating people about dignity, respect, and basic human decency. The issue is that you spent 30 minutes attacking my character, questioning my legitimacy, and demanding enhanced security screening based solely on racist assumptions about who belongs in first class and who deserves to be treated with basic respect. His words cut through the cabin air like precision instruments designed to expose the core issues of systematic discrimination and airline prejudice that extend far beyond individual incidents into corporate culture and institutional bias. Other passengers lean forward with growing recognition that they're witnessing not just personal justice but a masterclass in corporate leadership and social responsibility. Marcus Thompson documents every moment with professional precision, knowing that this interaction will become essential viewing for diversity training programs and discrimination awareness initiatives across multiple industries. Sarah Flowers approaches with a mixture of professional concern and personal relief that comes from watching systematic discrimination finally face appropriate consequences. Her training in customer service had required her to take Karen's complaints seriously, but her human instincts had recognized the racist nature of the accusations from the beginning. Mr. Miles, sir, Sarah says with respectful authority, should I initiate our discrimination incident protocols and begin documentation procedures for potential legal and policy review? David nods with the strategic thinking of someone who understands that corporate change requires systematic documentation and institutional response rather than just individual punishment or personal satisfaction. Absolutely, he confirms with executive command. I want complete documentation of every discriminatory statement, every racial assumption, and every demand for enhanced security screening based on prejudiced profiling. This incident will become a case study for our revised anti-discrimination policies and enhanced bias training programs. Karen realizes that her racist behavior is being transformed into corporate policy evidence and institutional change catalyst, that her 30 minutes of prejudiced performance will have consequences extending far beyond personal humiliation into systematic educational and legal implications. "You can't do this to me," she protests with the desperate authority of someone whose entitled worldview is being systematically dismantled by the consequences of her own actions. "I'm a platinum-level frequent flyer with significant corporate travel accounts. I have legal rights and customer service protections that prevent retaliation for legitimate passenger safety concerns." Her argument reveals the profound disconnect between her self-perception and reality. She's still trying to frame systematic racism as legitimate safety concerns, still attempting to use customer service policies to protect herself from consequences of discriminatory behavior, still unable to acknowledge that racial profiling isn't protected by frequent flyer status or corporate travel privileges. David's response carries the weight of executive decision-making authority and corporate legal consultation that will permanently alter Karen's relationship with airline travel and professional transportation options. "Ma'am, your frequent flyer status and corporate travel accounts are being immediately suspended pending full review of your discriminatory behavior and its impact on other passengers," he announces with the finality of someone making irreversible corporate policy decisions. "Your conduct has violated our zero-tolerance anti-discrimination policies, created hostile environment conditions for fellow travelers, and demonstrated systematic bias that cannot be tolerated in any aspect of our passenger experience." Hit that subscribe button right now if you want to see the complete aftermath of the most spectacular airline discrimination backfire in corporate history, because what happens next will show you exactly how systematic change and institutional accountability work when prejudice faces real consequences. The words hit Karen like physical blows as she realizes that her racist assumptions have cost her not just this flight but potentially her entire ability to use this airline for future business and personal travel. Her professional reputation, her social status, her basic mobility, all compromised by 30 minutes of prejudiced behavior directed at someone whose identity she never bothered to learn before attacking his character and dignity. Other passengers begin openly documenting the aftermath of Karen's discrimination campaign, recognizing that they're witnessing historic corporate justice and systematic accountability for airline prejudice and racial bias. Phones capture every moment of her dawning realization that assumptions about race and power have destroyed everything she thought she controlled. The complete destruction of Karen Mitchell's world begins immediately as the full consequences of her racist discrimination campaign against David Miles cascade through every aspect of her professional and personal life. What started as entitled prejudice about airplane seating has become the most viral example of airline discrimination backfiring in corporate history, with implications extending far beyond individual humiliation into systematic change and institutional accountability. David's executive assistant receives urgent notification about the discrimination incident and immediately activates comprehensive crisis management protocols designed to address not just the immediate passenger conflict but the broader implications for corporate culture, anti-discrimination policies, and systematic bias prevention across the entire airline industry. "I want complete documentation of this incident distributed to our legal department, human resources division, and policy development team," David instructed with the strategic authority of someone transforming individual prejudice into institutional learning opportunities. This situation provides perfect evidence for why our enhanced anti-discrimination training programs need immediate implementation across all levels of passenger service and employee education. Karen sits in stunned silence as she processes the reality that her 30 minutes of racist behavior have triggered corporate policy reviews, legal consultations, and systematic changes that will affect thousands of employees and millions of future passengers. Her prejudiced assumptions about one individual have created consequences extending throughout the entire aviation industry. Other passengers begin sharing their documentation of Karen's racist performance across social media platforms, creating viral content that will spark nationwide discussions about airline discrimination, passenger prejudice, and the dangerous consequences of racial assumptions in professional settings. The hashtags #airline discrimination and #passenger justice begin trending as millions of viewers witness systematic racism facing appropriate consequences. Marcus Thompson uploads his professional documentation of the incident with detailed commentary about systematic bias in corporate travel, discrimination in professional settings, and the importance of accountability for prejudiced behavior regardless of the victim's position or power. His business expertise helps contextualize the incident within broader discussions of travel equality and institutional change. Sarah Flowers completes her discrimination incident report with comprehensive details about every racist statement, every prejudiced assumption, and every demand for enhanced security screening based on racial profiling. Her documentation will serve as evidence for legal review, policy development, and training program creation designed to prevent similar incidents throughout the airline industry. Karen's desperate attempts to minimize her racist behavior reveal the psychological mechanisms of systematic prejudice and entitled discrimination that extend far beyond individual incidents into institutional bias and cultural problems requiring comprehensive solutions and policy changes. "I never meant for this to become such a big situation," she pleads with the voice of someone whose entire worldview has been shattered by the consequences of her own prejudiced actions. "I was just concerned about passenger safety and airline security. I never intended to discriminate against anyone or create problems for airline management or corporate operations." David's response carries the educational authority of someone who spent years learning how to transform individual incidents of discrimination into systematic change and institutional accountability measures that benefit entire organizations and communities. "Ma'am, the issue isn't your intentions but the impact of your actions on fellow passengers, airline employees, and corporate culture," he explains with the patient wisdom of someone who understands that teaching moments require comprehensive explanation rather than punitive responses. "Your behavior demonstrates systematic bias that creates hostile environments for travelers and employees regardless of your conscious motivations or personal beliefs." The legal implications of Karen's racist discrimination begin materializing as airline attorneys review documentation for potential defamation claims, harassment lawsuits, and civil rights violations that could result in significant financial consequences extending far beyond loss of airline privileges and frequent flyer status. Karen's corporate travel accounts receive immediate suspension notifications as her employer's legal department reviews the viral documentation of her discriminatory behavior and assesses potential liability for employee conduct during business-related travel. Her professional reputation faces systematic destruction as colleagues and clients witness her racist performance spreading across social media platforms. Other airlines begin reviewing her incident documentation as part of industry-wide information sharing about passengers who engage in discriminatory behavior, systematic harassment, and racial profiling that creates liability issues and hostile environments for fellow travelers and airline employees. The ripple effects of her 30 minutes of racism expand through professional networks, social media connections, and corporate relationships as colleagues, clients, and business partners witness her prejudiced behavior and racist assumptions documented in viral video content that will permanently define her public reputation and professional legacy. David's phone buzzes with messages from civil rights organizations, diversity advocacy groups, and corporate leadership experts who recognize his handling of systematic discrimination as a masterclass in executive responsibility, corporate accountability, and institutional change management. The incident becomes required viewing for business schools, diversity training programs, and corporate ethics courses as an example of how individual prejudice can trigger systematic change when leadership responds with wisdom, strategic thinking, and commitment to institutional improvement rather than personal retaliation. Karen's daughter calls from London in tears as wedding guests share viral videos of her mother's racist meltdown, creating social embarrassment and family humiliation that will overshadow what should have been a celebration of love, unity, and positive family relationships. The devastating irony of her situation becomes clear as she realizes that her attempt to exclude David from first class has resulted in her own exclusion from airline travel, that her effort to question his legitimacy has destroyed her own credibility, that her campaign to assert superiority has resulted in her complete professional and social humiliation. David's final statement to the media outlets requesting comment reveals his commitment to transforming individual incidents of discrimination into systematic change that benefits entire communities and organizations rather than focusing on personal justice or individual punishment. This incident demonstrates why comprehensive anti-discrimination policies, enhanced bias training, and zero-tolerance consequences for prejudice behavior are essential for creating inclusive environments where everyone can travel with dignity regardless of race, background, or assumptions others make about their legitimacy or success. He declares with the authority of someone whose leadership will create lasting institutional change. The viral aftermath continues expanding as millions of viewers share, comment, and discuss the incident across every social media platform, creating nationwide conversations about systematic racism, corporate accountability, and the importance of treating every individual with basic respect and human dignity regardless of assumptions about their background or authority. Karen Mitchell's racist discrimination has backfired in the most complete and devastating way possible, costing her everything she thought she controlled while creating the catalyst for systematic change that will improve conditions for countless future travelers and employees across the entire airline industry. The transformation is complete. One woman's racism has become an entire industry's opportunity for growth, systematic improvement, and institutional change that will create more inclusive and respectful environments for everyone who travels, works, and participates in corporate America. What's your biggest takeaway from this incredible story of airline discrimination backfiring? Subscribe immediately if you believe that airline discrimination should face real consequences and systematic change, because this story proves that prejudiced assumptions about race and power can destroy everything someone thinks they control in ways that create lasting institutional improvement. Comment below with your thoughts about assumptions, prejudice, and the importance of treating everyone with dignity and respect. Because stories like this prove that character matters more than status and kindness has more power than prejudice in creating the world we want to live in.